Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am excited today because I have Josh Cappel on the line. Say hello, Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Hey, Josh. No, it's one out of three. Give me that response.
Oh,
But
really?
I'm excited to have you on because you are a graphic design, art veteran in board games. You've been making board games for over 10 years, and in all sorts of capacities, all sorts of teams. You have your own
Yeah.
art graphic design company just under your name, I believe, and then you also partner with your wife on Kids Table Board Gaming, which recently did Haunt the House, which was a really nice Kickstarter and a great game. I really enjoyed that. Picnic Panic, Picnic Panic, is that correct?
Problem Picnic.
Problem Picnic, and the one before that was the
Food Fighters.
Food Fighters, right? So
Yeah.
lots of cool looking and fun games, really family oriented, based on the whole branding of the company. But to jump in, I always like to understand and work through people's sort of origin and how they got into the space. Like, what was your background in art and design, and then how did you transition into board games?
Right. Well, my background in art and design, I came from the Toronto film industry, actually. I worked for an art director who was the creative department for a number of film companies, and through him, I created a lot of props and sets and backdrops for commercials and music videos and stuff here in Toronto. And I've always been interested in board games. I've always designed and created my own board games, so I decided to sort of deliberately angle myself into being able to create art and graphic design for board games. So the way that I managed to get myself into it was I was active on a website called the Board Game Designers Forum, which is, I think it's still up. It's bgdf.com. And that forum was a place where aspiring board game designers would share their ideas with each other and engage in little challenges with each other, board game design challenges. There's sort of like a monthly competition to design a game based on parameters. That was a lot of fun. I managed to win it a couple times, which was great. Oh yeah, and a small community developed in that from that forum. And when I decided to try and get into art and design professionally for board games, what I did was anytime someone on the forum would announce or share that they had come close to a deal, or they were speaking with a publisher about a deal that maybe they were about to land or that they did land, I would look up the game that they had made on the forum and make some samples for it, show them to my designer friend and say, hey, if you like these, and why not pass them along to the publisher and say, hey, I have an illustrator who's familiar with my game, maybe you'll hire him for the job. So I did that a couple times, and then finally a publisher did bite. And that publisher was Zev from Z-Man, which is a wonderful situation for me. The game was called Gios, designed by Renee Wiersma. And Zev hired me for that. And it went really, really well. And he hired me again, and he hired me again. I did, I don't know, maybe a dozen games for Z-Man coming out of that, including some really great ones. And then from there...
Let me just interrupt for a second. So that's actually very similar. I had Sebas Kosiner on, who is a new graphic designer in the space, video game background, but he spoke about going into forums as a graphic designer and an artist and looking for projects that were moving along and essentially being, hey, here's a couple samples, here's something I did. He may not have done this sort of pass through the publisher, which is an interesting approach, but very much, hey, it looks like you're doing something neat. I have some value to add, and not getting too caught up with it at the outset. You need to hire me to do this, but really just looking for opportunities to break in. And it sounds like with Z-Man, that's awesome. And that sort of reminds me of my conversations with Ben Schulman, another graphic designer I've had on, where, good work beget good work, and more, if you're good at what you do and you're organized and you're timely and you communicate well, the people are interested in having a go-to graphic designer is like priceless. It really is.
Yeah, Ben is great. I've been noticing his work. He did Tiny Epic Quest. Is that right?
He's done most of almost every Tiny Epic since Kingdoms, or I think he was maybe the first one on. Right. And he's worked with me on a number of games too. But yeah, he's great. And so So you did that, and then you were working with Zev. Can you continue your story?
Well, the story from there is that once I had a couple of games under my belt that became well known, then publishers started approaching me. So I didn't really have to look for work for much longer after that. Work started coming to me, and I was able to start kind of pick and choose between the games and the publishers that I wanted to work with, and it blossomed pretty quickly into stable relationships with a handful of publishers that after we'd finish a game, it would just be next one, next one, next one. So I field still dozens of, if not hundreds of, quote requests every year from startup publishers who are like, "Hey, check out my game. Maybe you'd be interested in working on it." And I've really kind of boiled down to a few particular publishers that I work for now. One in particular, like you said, is Kids Table for my wife, KTBG, and another is Grand Gamers Guild out of Michigan. I'm the in-house. I'm now the in-house art director there, so
that's cool.
So I do a lot of work for him, and in the very tiny little cracks that remain in my schedule, I try to squeeze in other projects as well.
Awesome. And actually, I was about to ask you, hey, you get centered again.
Drifting.
It's easy to drift in these things, but if it didn't, it clamps it when I make the side by side. But so actually, one of the things that I was hoping you can talk about, obviously, as I mentioned, I've played a lot of I think almost all of the Kids Table board gaming stuff, but most recently Haunt the House, which I was really impressed with. But I happen to I think I already have it over in the other area, but I just played and did a review of Scoville, which your work's all over. And one of the things that strikes me about your graphic design and artwork, which is a little harder to piece out of the actual design work that you've done on some of these things, because I don't know where you and the designer meet, but is one, you clearly have a really strong appreciation for the communication of design, iconography, layout. In the case of Scoville, I was really impressed by how much of the game could be taught and enjoyed without the instructions. Like you could basically, all of the different variants and things you needed to reference are right there, and you didn't have to worry about it, and it wasn't sort of just a lookup. You have enough lookup with that chart. You don't have to be looking up rules and stuff.
We tried, man. We tried to get away from that chart, but there was no way to do it. You just need it. You need that.
Especially when you, at the beginning, you could have been like, oh, it's primary and secondary colors, but then you just go off the deep end and it's no longer. But but so, and what you also have this sort of illustrative, cartoony, but still interesting, sophisticated style, for lack of a better descriptor. And one of the things I was curious about is sort of, I don't imagine that's what you were doing in film with these props and the things that you were talking about. How did you?
No.
How could you talk a little bit about the graphic designer half of what you do, and some of the philosophies and approaches you have there? And can you then also talk about how, as an artist, you've really, I'm sure you stretch based on needs here and there, but sort of have a pretty representative style that fits well in the gaming space.
Right. Okay. Well, as a graphic designer, you mentioned with Scoville that everything is right there, and there's not a lot of need for lookup in the rulebook because a lot of what you need is on all the components. So that's something that always, I guess, my core philosophy is that if I'm playing a game and I wish something was there for me to look up, then that's how I would want to design the game. So I try to put everything in a place where when you naturally need it, your eye is already looking at it. So your setup information is on the back of your player screen, or different player count scaling things are indicated on the board, or basically the game is just making it easier for you to play it instead of counting on you remembering to look something up in the rulebook every time you need to. My job as the graphic designer for a game is to make the rules function as smoothly as they can during the gameplay of the game. And that's what I try to do with every project, is have the design and the componentry make the game a better experience. That's what it has to all be about, is everything needs to make the flow of the game as smooth as possible so that the physical manifestation of the game is making the game smoother rather than bumpier. That's right.
And so then, let's just stick on the graphic design piece of it. Yeah. As you're going through that process, and you have all these different voices, and it depends on the game. between the designer of the mechanical design, the systems designer, the game designer, and the publisher. And I don't know, you've worked with different groups. Sometimes perhaps you're not really collaborating very much with the designer. Sometimes it's all about working with the design. Can you talk about what it's like as a graphic designer to work with publishers and designers, and how that differs between the two, and what your experiences have been there?
Right. It varies widely between different publishers. Some publishers, sometimes I've had literally zero contact with the designer, and that's because the publisher has just kind of taken the project from them, and then the publisher is running it through me. But most of the time, and how I prefer it, is to have steady and ongoing contact with the designer. In most cases, the publisher has final say, and the designer has input, permission from the publisher.
Right.
So it comes down to veto power from the publisher. Sometimes the publisher doesn't want to be involved in this aspect of it, and is happy to let me and the designer of the game just kind of hash it out, and at the end of the project say, "Here you go. Here's what we've come up with."
And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And so, out of curiosity, because I see it there's always this interesting dynamic with graphic designers and game designer people who've done both. Mm-hmm. How do you see your role in terms of influencing the design of the actual core game? Do you find that you're often in conversations where you're like, "Hey, I was playing it, and maybe it seems like you should have more cards here, or this is a little weird," or are you a little bit more like, "Well, I'm not going to worry about that, and I'm just going to communicate it"? Do you try to participate in the design half, or do you?
Very much. I do worry. That is one of my primary concerns, is making sure that the game works well. I don't want my name to be on a game that's going to be bad. So if a game has an obvious problem that I notice when I'm putting it together, I'm definitely going to bring it to the attention of the designer. One of my strengths is in rulebook creation, and I've gotten a pretty good reputation, I think, for making rulebooks that are as clear as possible and explain games well. So the very, very first thing I do when I get a game project is I get the rulebook, and I get any prototype components from the designer or the publisher. I build myself a copy, and I start running through it and playing it based on the rules. And from there, I do a head-to-toe re-edit of the rulebook. I rewrite it, reshape the whole thing, and restructure it in a way that I've learned is the best way to communicate games. And sometimes, like you said, I'll encounter something that is a question or is a problem or maybe could be explained better.
Sure.
I never ever want to change the mechanisms of a game. If they have to, if there's a problem, then I'll highlight it. But my job as the graphic designer and the rulebook developer is not to change the mechanisms of a game, but maybe to change the components of a game so that they communicate those mechanisms better.
Sure.
Or change how the rules are communicated so that they are more intuitive than original.
For sure. I mean, I think that's something that you often see. How especially when a designer has given a prototype that's then the publisher, or through collaboration, gets a theme sort of associated with it. There are different ways to really use theme to help communicate how things work, and to use again, visualization or UI or components to sort of say, well, this clearly is associated with this, and this is the set, and this is how these things get pulled together. To jump to the other side, because I'm curious there too, how did, and how much of an active decision was it versus just over time, did you develop and establish your sort of art approach on the games? Because sometimes it's not just graphic design. Oftentimes, it looks like you're illustrating, you're doing much more than just UX UI work on the board and the box and the rules.
Yes, I do. Not always. A lot of times, recently especially, I've been managing illustrators rather than doing the illustration myself. But I still do a lot of illustration, and then my style just kind of developed by itself, honestly. I don't consider myself to be the greatest illustrator or especially painter in the world, and at first I started to try to emulate board game artists that I liked, but I eventually kind of reverted to and refound my native style, which is sort of this bright and colorful, almost cartoony style with heavy dark outlines on it, and it really seems to work very well for certain feel of
Sure.
board games.
Yeah.
And, like it has to be appropriate. I wouldn't want to apply it to like a
Well, it's got that
gritty.
bold. It's it's cartoony and graphic, right? So it doesn't fall into cute necessarily, but
Right.
it's not. If it's probably not great for a 4-hour war game, right? Like I mean, there's certain
Right.
stuff that are appropriate for it, right?
Exactly. But for medium weight, sort of approachable board games, it seems to work really well. It stands out. People recognize it. They'll go, "Oh, that's a Josh Cappel game for sure." And I know that illustration style. So it's people like it. It works for board games, and a lot of where that style comes from, I think, is me working around my limitations as an illustrator and trying to find something that I can produce quickly and comfortably that still works well. So
Yeah,
that's the secret.
Yeah, and chasing what you're good at and what you enjoy drawing, right? It's terrible if you didn't like the style and you just are doing it over and over again. Well, so then another question I have for you, just to get a little bit more perspective, about, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, I did a featurette, I don't know, a video on the Game Artisans of Canada, which I believe you're a part of or associated with or worked with in one form or another.
Yeah, I'm an artisan for a while.
Yeah, how, just in your own words, because that was just me reporting, from my perspective, being an actual member, how would you describe it? How would you talk about that group?
The Game Artisans of Canada?
Yeah.
It's the organization that is responsible for me being as good at a game designer as I am. I love my relationship with the Game Artisans of Canada. Some of my best friendships now are from that organization. It developed as a distinct forum online. The Game Artisans of Canada has its own forum. It's less populated now because a lot of the conversation has moved to Facebook. But when it first began several years ago, it replaced the Board Game Designers Forum for me, which was the place that I originally came from. And the membership there was very, very interested in helping each other. It really is. It became very much about the community and about what do I contribute and how can I help. Right. So we have mathematicians, we have engineers, we have illustrators, we have graphic designers, we have IP specialists, we have diplomats, we have just all sorts of people with all sorts of talents that were able to come together and use those talents to help each other out. So the Game Artisans of Canada, it's an amazing organization. I don't know. I can't say enough good about the Game Artisans of Canada.
I mean, it really seems that way, right? It seems like a group that sort of is very inwardly supportive of its members and growth and mentorship and advice, and really that sort of, a lot of that community that I continue to regularly see in the board game space, right? Just that very all tide rises, all boats sort of approach and non-competitive, association, I think is super compelling, and it's really been, for me, just a huge part of what's been inspiring about board games and the board games industry to me, coming from video games where I never really saw it that same way.
Right.
And so I think, inherently you're playing, everyone makes things that involves you having to work with and collaborate and associate with other people, right? You have the game at a table. And so no, I think it's awesome.
Something's happening.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's really great.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the membership is really wonderful. We have some incredible people in the organization, and the interesting thing about it is when it first formed, a lot of it was about how can we get signed,
Right.
It was all very like aspiring game designers, no one with a publishing contract, no one with any experience, all of us just kind of trying to crack the code of the publishing industry and trying to design our games and improve them and get them signed. And now, years later, we are full of published designers, full of publishers, full of developers, just people who have managed to actually carve out a space for themselves in the game industry, and we still continue to hold on to that relationship and help each other. So it really, the organization has grown from what it was and succeeded at what it wanted to do. it's cool to think about all the success that has come from it.
Oh, that's awesome. And an interesting, it shifted a little bit, but an interesting thing, similar thing happened with the League of Game Makers, where initially the League of Gamers was all these, and I wasn't even necessarily a part of it at the very beginning, but all these guys and gals getting together who really wanted to make games and be part of it and get published and do their part and do Kickstarters and collaborating and working. And over time, almost all of them have emerged and become bigger names in whatever field or thing they're doing in the space. One of the unfortunate things about League of Game Makers compared to Game Artisans of Canada, I think, is because you guys had some regional relationships where you set up these chapters in a little bit more of a structure. I think you have, as an organization, been able to bring in more consistently new people and new designers and new hopefuls to continue to energize and move it on the League of Game Maker side. It's one of the things that has happened, and it's not a bad thing, it's a natural thing, but since sort of you had the senior team, this team that grows into seniors and then blossoms into, everyone's busy, and everyone, doesn't everyone likes each other and is helpful, but isn't necessarily like needing to be in there asking the question every second.
Yeah, and, same for us too.
And so you have that, little bit of like, how do we continue to carry and share and drive the league? And right now we've been thinking about different approaches coming next year to sort of have more initiative-based league stuff as opposed to simply that sort of form space. But we're still figuring it out, right? Because you have to have that not leadership structure, but just that organizational glue that keeps bringing people through and re-engaging and not just becoming this thing that flies away. So that's a challenge.
Because as people do find their success, then like you said, they get busy or they develop other relationships with different publishers or game groups, different designers that they collaborate with, and it does become hard to hold on to that core group.
Yeah,
a lot of us are now blossomed and grown and flown away from the nest, and we all have our other relationships. But when it comes down to conventions or get-togethers and stuff, those are still the people we kind of gravitate to and spend our time with, and we do have our online conversations as well. So
awesome.
Yeah, we're finding a way.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I remember when my first organization was at college. I started a game development group, and I was planning to be the president the whole time, and then I was away, and vice president, whatever. They were pushing for elections, and I was like, why have elections? I'm just running the thing. Like, I don't want to have elections. But I had a really long conversation, and because I was living in Japan at the time, and I was for like a year abroad type of thing, and I sort of said, fine, let's do it, and I actually didn't win, and it was just like it was a big challenge for me, but it allowed me to move more specifically from organization into game making, but also, Wolverine Soft is an organization that's still alive at the University of Michigan all these years later, and it's because it has a structure now where people come in, they fill roles, they do their part, and then get people to fill in behind them and do that stuff, so it's important to have that. One of the things, and I wanted to make sure to ask you about because it's super cool, is so you're doing your thing, and at some point, Helena gets involved and starts her company, and you're starting to work with her, and you guys at Haunt the House and all the other titles I mentioned, but it's correct, right? You're now going back to one of your original games, Endeavor, right? Where that's such a cool story. Can you tell that story for a second?
All right. Endeavor is a game that was published by Z-Man in, I think, 2008. And I did the art and graphic design for it. It's designed by two designers from New Zealand, Carl DeVisser and Jarrett Gray. And Z-Man signed that game and put it out, and it found pretty good success. It did maybe 10,000 units at the time.
Back then, that's a big number. I mean,
Yeah, really great. But then, for some reason, Z-Man decided not to reprint it when it went out of print, which was kind of surprising. It was top 150 game on Board Game Geek, and it got had a very good reputation, very good reviews. I personally love it. our family and game group's most played game of all time. We still play it constantly.
Wow.
That has never fallen out of the stack of games that comes to our game group years and years and years later. Like, it's consistently there. Anyway, eventually, Z-Man's contract to publish it lapsed and expired. The company Z-Man changed hands a few times, and whoever picked up the company for some reason or other decided we're just not going to pursue this game, and the contract eventually died. And Helena had always known somehow that she was going to end up publishing this game. Like, it's weird. It's really weird because she was always insistent. I'm going to do this game one day. It's going to happen. And this is before she had formed a publishing company. This is before it was even really realistic that she was going to start a publishing company. She's a school teacher by profession. That's what she does. Anyway, a few years ago, she formed Kids Table Board Gaming because she saw that there was a niche that she really wanted to fill in terms of creating games that kids and adults could play together, or that they could play separately and still enjoy them. So she started doing that and became interested and good at publishing, and she's grown quite a lot. And then she decided that she wanted to try a crack at a larger, heavier game that wouldn't be under the Kids Table banner. She formed a new company called Burnt Island Games.
Okay, so that game's going to be out by Burnt Island Games.
Yeah, it's going to be by Burnt Island Games because she felt like it wasn't right for Kids Table Board Gaming. And she also picked up a publishing partner in Grand Gamers Guild. So the endeavor will be put out by Grand Gamers Guild and Burnt Island as a co-production.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Mark Spector from Grand Gamers Guild is great. I do a lot of work for him now. Like I said, I'm his art director right now, so I do a lot of work for him. There's an existing relationship between the three of us, and one of his specialties is that he runs demo teams in conventions all across the United States. So that's a very, very amazing asset to have in terms of getting your games out there.
Oh, for sure.
Promoted and played. So that's a huge addition to the team. And anyway, Helena, through sheer force of personality, managed to contact these game designers and convince them to sign with her, and convinced them and made them understand that we were going to do an incredible job with it and treat it with the best respect. And they know me already because I worked on the game previously, so they knew that I understood the game. And
sure.
Yeah, it just managed to actually become a reality. So the contracts have been signed. We've been working on the game art and development. We're adding some new stuff. We're changing some stuff. And the Kickstarter goes live in January.
Oh, that's exciting.
Right now, it's a huge one. It's bigger than any game that we've worked on for Kids Table, probably by 4 times larger than any of those games. And right now, we're trying to push people to go to endeavorgame.com and sign up to the mailing list there so they can be aware of how the game is progressing and when the Kickstarter gets launched.
Awesome. I haven't played it. I'm super curious now. Maybe when you guys start doing your outreach, you can send me a copy. I know that Legendary Creatures by far was way bigger than all my other stuff. Like just in the component asset files. And there's just something, as you get through those different tiers of just sheer volume of files, it gets crazy. But that's and again, I love that story just because when you make something and you put your effort into it, it sucks when it sort of disappears. The cool thing for board games, which I love, and what drew me into board games from a creation standpoint, on its own was this idea that with Liftoff, I could make it and make a prototype, and you know what? If no one signed it and never went anywhere, I'd still have that thing. I was working in mobile and free-to-play games, and once those servers go down and the game's not popular anymore, whatever, it's gone. I mean, even old mobile games that don't have servers but are on iPhone 3s, you can't play those anymore.
Right.
But there's something awesome about these properties that you can go and pick up and still play years, decades later. And cool. It seems like this was a great opportunity where the publisher lost interest, which isn't that uncommon. There's some people just want to keep doing new stuff. and it opened up the opportunity for you guys. It's a huge movement too, restoration stuff right now, right? You know, restoration games. There's a lot of people who want to see those classics, you know, improved, refined, and brought back out, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what we're trying to do with Endeavor. I mean, it's not been that long since it was active, but long enough that it's built up a very large and interested following of people that like, I wish I didn't get rid of my copy, or I wish I had had the chance to play it, but I can't find it anywhere. So we think that it's going to have a really strong start to its campaign.
Awesome. Well, that's super exciting, and I've interacted a little with Gamers Guild. Mark I've seen online plenty. Actually, he gave me some snide feedback recently. So the day I was like, oh yeah, that was he just in a helpful, in a James Matthew sort of way, like
okay,
you know, like. But anyway, I think it's cool that you're collaborating and working together, like all these different groups are doing. So, you know, so and presumably you are just going to continue to make some games, do graphic design, do art and illustration as appropriate. And I mean, it sounds like you're just at a really happy, steady state in terms of you have your sort of go-to publishers and works, you know, sort of, you know, games that you know are going to be there year after year, and then you're picking up a thing here, you're picking up a thing there. It sounds like you've landed at a pretty good, and you're an art director for another. I mean, it sounds like you've landed at a pretty good space, right?
Yes, I'm very happy with where it is right now. I mean, things are, because of that art director gig, things have become stable in a way that they haven't been for me in a long, long time. I haven't had a regular paycheck in 10 years, and now I do have one because there's sort of an expected monthly payment that comes in. So it changes the game for me quite a bit and allows for some cool stability with what we're doing. So
you get to go on vacation.
I do get to go on vacation, although they're mostly gaming-related vacations these days.
Yeah, it's hard when there's so many cons. You're like, well, I'm just going to go to this next con in 2 weeks and this next con.
It's true. I'm going to PAX tomorrow.
Yeah. This will post after that, but yeah, half the industry is going to PAX and half the industry is going to BGG. So it should be pretty cool, and lots of interesting developments will come out of that. Those are both, I expect. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of collaborations and projects, I think, you know, pop out of those.
Where are you going?
I'm going to BGG. I had already sort of I really enjoy BGG. It's like, for me, where it falls in the year and the people who are there, it's probably the one where I get to like just hang out and play the most games. I think the people who are attacking and going after PAX are people who are really still in the like, I want to build and grow my brand, I want to sell product, I want to connect with new and more audience, and there's nothing wrong with that, or they live in that area. But like, for me, so far, you know, to the extent I've been going to cons, BGG is more like the like, it's Thanksgiving, I'm just going to have a good time type of convention, not the like, I need to like be a mover and shaker type of vibe, which is not, you know, again, it's great. In November's usually been quiet, and now there's this big, you know, this big convention. Yeah,
it's nice that there's both at this time.
I think next year they might not overlap them, which will be nice for some people, but you know, who knows? We submitted to Keith Mateka and I submitted to PAX Indie Showcase South, which is their January convention for their Indie Showcase. So we'll see if we get into the list. Who knows?
Right.
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so thanks so much for your time. It's really interesting to see how it's developed, and I mean, it's super awesome. Continue the great work, man. I love seeing all the different games as they come out. And everyone watching, you know, subscribe, share all that good stuff. Most importantly, make some great games, play some great games, all that stuff. Anyway, yes. Thanks for watching.